All right, guys, and welcome back to Ask an Autistic. Every week we meet, we have a panel of autistic adults who can get your questions answered as parents. You can come on, it's totally free, a chance for you to get your questions answered directly from the people who understand autism the most, people living with autism. So I'm actually going to start off tonight's conversation with a topic that was brought up this week, and it created a ton of debate among the professional community. So I put a video out, and it was talking about how to teach eye contact to children with autism. And there became this debate as to whether or not it's appropriate to teach children with autism to make eye contact. And it seemed like the professional community is very split on this. I know where I fall, right? Because I put a video out teaching how to teach eye contact to children. So I wanted to get the panel's opinion and see what you guys think. Is it appropriate to teach eye contact to children with autism? Now, I'm not talking about these like old school, ridiculous ABA programs that are really just stupid, where you say, look at me, and you have to stare at the kid for like 10 seconds. I mean, that's just weird. It's unnatural. It's ridiculous. So yeah, I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about the idea that, for example, if a child wants something, they can look at the object and look back at their caregiver to show them that they actually want something. So to me, this is a very important skill. It's one that I typically teach, but I am always willing to admit when I'm wrong. So I wanted to get the panel's take on it to see what you guys think. So Michelle, I'm gonna have you unmute first, and it's gonna go right down in order. What do you think? Now, Michelle, you are diagnosed with autism. You were nonverbal as a child, so you probably relied heavily on nonverbal communication or non-vocal communication. And you are a paraprofessional now teaching and working with kids with autism. So what is your take on this? I would really want to hear your opinion. Are you teaching eye contact, and why or why not?
I actually, there are, like what you were saying about with teaching eye contact, like if you're looking at a caregiver for like requests kind of things like that, like I actually do feel that is important as well, because like you're kind of like, you are showing in the way that like there are things about that, like I've heard back and forth from the community as well, that like in ways like you think that they're not listening, or like that they are. Like to me, like in my opinion, I feel like it's important. Like I feel like that if there are other ways of communicating, like for me, I was nonverbal for years, so I had to rely on another way of other types of communication. So eye contact for me in that case, that was what I had to work on, and I do that for any of my students too, because that's just another form of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's Michelle, was my take on it, is this is a really important skill to have. It's a very basic skill that exists in all animals. It's not even just within humans, this idea of using eye contact to talk to people. Now, there's like this idea and there's this belief that for some people with autism, that making eye contact can be painful. And I had heard professionals say this. I've never experienced anybody telling me before that they thought making eye contact was painful. And again, I'm not talking about prolonged staring or this like awkwardness in social situations where if someone is uncomfortable and they're not turned and look at a speaker saying, you look at me, like, like back in teachers did when we were kids, and whether you're autistic or not. I remember, we would turn our back to our, if you were as a kid, you're just not looking at the person who's making you uncomfortable, and you sitting there and saying, no, you need to look at me. I'm not talking about that. But like the basic, really what is a very basic verbal behavior skill, this idea that if you look at an object and then you look back at the person, that it's a sign that you want this. For me, have you personally experienced like autism being painful? The idea of making that, have you personally experienced that? Did you ever have that as an issue?
That's a really good question. Like, I wouldn't say myself that it was painful. Like, I know that people would say like that because in ways of like terms of like of anxiety or anything like that, if they don't feel comfortable looking too long. That's just, but personally for me, not really. It was just, for me, I know that was one of the things, was just working on it for me in terms of communication, because I verbally couldn't communicate. So it's just another form of communication that was needed to just to work on and everything.
Yeah, that's that's actually what my perspective of that is too. Is not that we're like forcing people to be uncomfortable and make constant eye contact in all situations, because the reality of it is that whether you're autistic or not, you don't make eye contact constantly with people. I mean, that would just be awkward and weird. But the idea of like, for me, it's not that you're going to force a child who's communicating, this makes me uncomfortable. But if you're not going to teach it and a person isn't naturally doing it, you're depriving them of the opportunity to have that as a skill. So that's where my take on that is. I think that that's crazy. I never even knew that there were professionals that existed that would be against teaching eye contact. Because how can you deprive a person of the ability to have a skill? It doesn't mean that if that person says, hey, listen, when I'm in a sensory overload, then it's too much information for me, too much stimulus to look at you straight in the eyes. Okay, fine, then you don't require that. But that's different than depriving a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old of the opportunity, if they can't talk yet, from learning how to use eye contact as communication. So that was my take on it. So I'm happy to hear we share a similar opinion. I may not share the same opinion with everybody in the group. And again, I'm very flexible. This is as much of a learning experience for me as it is for everybody else. So Jesse, I'd love to hear your take on it. Did you personally think eye contact was painful? And do you think it's an important skill to teach to kids? Or do you think it's something that professionals should just avoid teaching altogether?
My fear is that a child may want to please the professional so much that they go to the other extreme. And that was pretty much the essence of my childhood. I'd fix a problem, then immediately create an entirely new problem, which may be a little bit less severe, but still was a huge issue. I remember I went through a phase where I ate very, very slow and made everyone late. And then one day, like a light switch, I switched over to the other extreme. I've kind of stayed in that extreme ever since. Therefore, my fear is that, as you said, yes, the child could go to the other extreme and just stare at people so much with unblinking eyes that they make people uncomfortable. I think it's better to let a child know that they need to be engaged in what somebody's saying. For example, if one of their peers is talking about Matchbox cars or their favorite cartoon program, if the child who is supposedly listening is kind of twiddling their thumbs, looking down, looking the other direction, you can explain that when they do that, it makes them seem like they have absolutely no interest in the conversation or the person. It's not about not breaking eye contact. It's about letting someone know that you value what they're saying, and having eye contact in spurts of time. Instead of saying, make eye contact, do not break eye contact, you can say, why don't we practice looking at each other for no more than 3 minutes? And then if you're uncomfortable, you can start to look elsewhere. And then we can try again for another 3 minutes, just to break out the habit of the child looking at the ceiling as someone's talking to them. And that's all.
Yeah, my rule is actually typically around 3 seconds, believe it or not. Like that, I think it should be very fleeting. Like, I don't think you need to stare at someone intently for 3 minutes personally. But yeah, like I get what you're saying. The idea this can be overgeneralized. For me, it's more just the idea that they can quickly look at an object and look back at someone to say, hey, listen, I want this object. Now, I mean, the debate is, do they really need to make direct eye contact or just orient towards the speaker? I'm fine with a child just really orienting towards the speaker, but really eye contact to me is just this basic animal instinct of connecting to the other person you're communicating with. So, but yeah, so Jesse, it's an interesting point that people could overgeneralize it. Obviously this idea that prolonged eye contact could potentially be uncomfortable for someone. Have you ever heard of someone who's autistic, or did you experience someone who's autistic personally telling you that it was painful to look at someone in the eyes for a short period of time, less than 5 seconds?
I have no personal recollection, but I know that John Elder Robison wrote a book called Look Me in the Eye, and that suggests that it was painful for him, sort of like looking directly into the sun. And I believe that it also depends on the person. When you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and you may have another person who makes too much eye contact and overdoes it. And but I like your idea of 3 seconds. I think I just took 3 minutes and went with it by the seat of my pants. I was not really considering that it could be too long for a child on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, no worries, Jesse. Like I said, I'm actually really trying to learn from you guys tonight. I mean, I always learn from you, but I'm asking this question because genuinely, when someone said to me, like, hey, this video is crazy, why are you teaching people to make eye contact? I had never heard that before. And it was enough people, it wasn't just like one person. So it was enough people that I said, okay, maybe there's something to this. But so far, it seems that everyone's in agreement that it's okay to teach eye contact in some capacity. So Kevin, I'm really interested in hearing your opinion. Kevin, you said you talked when you were younger, but you had some issues with nonverbal communication, social communication. So I'd be interested to hear your perspective. And also you are currently teaching kids with autism and you are getting your RBT. So I would really want to hear your perspective on this, Kevin. Do you think it's appropriate to teach a child how to make eye contact?
Overall, I would say yes. I think it's a skill that probably should be worked on at an early age, because I agree with I agree with you about not depriving people the opportunity of learning what is an important conversational skill. And I think eye contact was actually something I may have struggled a little bit with when I was younger, but not as much as a lot of people with autism do. So it was overall, I've generally had better eye contact, but yeah, I mean, and I think a good way to maybe, and I personally, I've never found eye contact painful, nor have I really heard of anyone with autism finding making eye contact painful. But what I think they might what it might make them is uncomfortable. I think might be a feeling of like they're uncomfortable looking someone directly in the eyes. So, but as far as getting them there, I think a good way to do it is probably through like the same approach you had, like the video that I shared about getting them getting them to eat more foods, like that systematic desensitization approach to food. I think that same approach can be used to teaching eye contact. You kind of like you start off small and say like just look for a few seconds, and then gradually increase the amount of time, like the length of time that you're hoping that you're the goal for length of time that you spend looking at the other person in conversation. So yeah, I think it can be done with a good systematic desensitization kind of shaping approach would be the best way to teach eye contact. And since it is in the real world, I mean, like, I'm glad you kind of have the practical view of this, because I know, like, in a perfect world, the world would be kind of, like more accommodating of, and like embracing of people who are different. I am also, I'm going to admit, I'm kind of a realist, and like what's going to be expected of your, and what's going to be expected of your autistic kid out in the real world, especially as they grow up. It's going to be better for them to learn as many skills of the important skills, social skills as possible. And eye contact, in conversation, I would put as definitely one of those skills.
Yeah, I agree with you. And like I said, specifically, I'm not talking about this idea that in a prolonged social situation where you're spending 10, 15 minutes having coffee and chatting with someone that you need to like stare them down for 3 minutes, 4 minutes. I mean, realistically, we all look at our phones anyway nowadays. We're sitting down, we're talking to people, we're like, hey, how are you? What's going on? What's your day like? Right? That's the reality of what today's world is. I'm talking about this like basic idea of like putting your hand out and looking at something, or like, just like if I'm sitting and having coffee with you and I look at the creamer and be like, hey, can you pass me that? Like this really simple like idea that you can use your eyes to communicate. To me, it's a very important skill. I was very surprised to hear anyone think that that shouldn't be taught. But so I'm actually really glad we're doing this video, because I think it's important for professionals. Sometimes I think there's this trend of professionals listening to adults that have autism and this listening to feedback, which is fantastic and wonderful and beautiful. But just like sometimes I think people with autism can overgeneralize things, I don't want professionals for us to make that same mistake either, and to stop teaching people crucial skills because one or two people said like, had a really strong opinion about it. And now we're overgeneralizing it and saying, hey, you know, eye contact shouldn't be taught to kids with autism. Well, no, that's probably not true. We probably just need to do it in a way that's respectful and appropriate. And obviously, if someone says, this is making me uncomfortable, I don't want to do this, I would disrespect a person's bodily autonomy and their right to just exist the way they want to exist. That's very different than teaching a 2-year-old that if they want to, for my opinion, you know, if they want to, let's say, have a Cheerio, or they want to have their bottle or whatever it is, their toy, that they can look at their caregiver to show, hey, mom, I want you to blow bubbles for me, or mom, I want you to give me my milk. So, thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate your opinion.
Yeah, no problem.
So Jeff, you are next on my list. And again, I want to hear your perspective of this. I know you did struggle with vocal communication for a while. So do you think eye contact is an important skill and that we should be teaching it? And have you personally had any experience having eye contact be painful, or hearing of anyone who found it to be painful or aversive?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think with eye contact, I think it's an important thing to teach, but you can't force it on children. I mean, like people with autism tend to struggle with eye contact. It's just the way we are. But I think eye contact needs to be taught, not just because of, you know, just to prepare the child for social situations as they get older, like for example, like for family gatherings, or like, you know, have eye contact, listen to like the teacher or the parent or things of that sort. And then there's also the matter of when it comes time, when the child becomes an adult or a teenager, they're going to start looking for jobs. And when they go in for the job interview, they're going to have to look at their potential boss during the interview, because if you're looking down, you know, you're not going to get that job. So I think it's more of a matter of teaching eye contact only for certain social situations, whether it's, you know, again, family gatherings at school, or a job interview, or after the job. You know, you're gonna get it. Once you get the job, then you're gonna have to look at the customers or look at the colleagues. So it's more of a social standard to teach about eye contact, but it should be something that should not be abused or forced.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jeff. I mean, if someone doesn't, and when someone's a teenager, they have a lot more of an idea. And I mean, I guess kids do have an idea of like what they like and don't like, but a teenager is fully developed and mature enough to really kind of make decisions for themselves. Where I think that often for children, parents have to make decisions for a child just because they're children, right? They don't have the ability to make informed decisions. As you know, Jeff and Jeff and I don't, and we won't go into opinions on this video, but we don't agree about flu shots personally. But Jeff is an adult and he gets to make that choice. And if Jeff was 3, his parents would make that choice for him, right? So it's, you know, depending upon really when you have to make some decisions for a child, I don't think it's personally appropriate for an adult to decide, well, you know what, this 3-year-old doesn't they're not going to learn eye contact when they're 3. I don't think that's a choice an adult should be making for a child personally. I think that it should be if a child says is when they're 15, hey, listen, you know, I don't care if I'm not going to get that job. Eye contact makes me uncomfortable. I'm not going to do it. Okay, great. That's your choice at that age. But not teaching it as a potential skill for a kid, for me, that's not a choice a professional should be making for a child, personally. But I'd like your take on this, Jeff. Now, Monica, you and I had different opinions, and often you bring another aspect of this conversation that we might not have thought of. So I'm interested in hearing your perspective on this.
Okay, so I noted that you said, if a child says, this is making me uncomfortable, I don't want to do it. You said I obviously wouldn't continue. So that means that you have to be teaching a child who can verbally express that they're uncomfortable. So therefore, you shouldn't be teaching eye contact to a 2-year-old that can't express in that way when they're uncomfortable. So people have been saying eye contact's not painful. So I'm sure that it is painful for some people. We can't generalize that because this group doesn't find it painful, that no autistic finds it painful. I don't find eye contact painful, but I find it super violating. So like, it makes me really uncomfortable if someone requires eye contact from me. And I think that there's some really great ways for us to teach signs of engagement, which is what we culturally want through eye contact, without it being eye contact. So we can teach a child how to show that they're engaged without requiring eye contact. For example, when I am teaching a child something or giving an instruction, or I need them to focus, I will say, look at my face, or look at this paper, or I will draw their attention to something, but I never tell them to look at my eyes.
Yeah, so, but my question though is not I 100% agree with you. And I actually do not agree with teaching sustained eye contact in social situations. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something as simple as looking at, like, I'm making this little cactus because I'm making a vision board, because I know they're talking in the chat about the fact that it's 97 degrees out west. Well, it's cold on the East Coast and I don't like the cold. So I'm painting a cactus in my copious amounts of spare time for my vision board. But I'm talking about like the most simple expression of eye contact, where someone would look at this cactus and look back up at the person for like half a second. I'm not talking about like, show me you're engaged in what I'm saying and for 5 minutes, like stare at me. I'm talking about the absolute most basic level of requesting via eye contact that a person or can possibly do, of like just looking and then looking. And I'm not even forcing it to be at the eyes. I mean, I did use a shaping procedure to gradually help a child understand to look at the person's eyes. But I also talked about in the video, like giving it to them if they look at the nose or the mouth. So I'm talking about the most basic level, not sustained social interactions, communications, but the most basic level of, you can show me you want something when you look at it, and then look at me, because I will understand that's a form of communication and request.
See, I wouldn't teach that because it's not clear communication.
It's not, but for a child that is, and this is my thing, is for a child that's 2 years old and can't yet talk and can't yet point, it is the initial step of communication.
See, that's so abstract to me. It wouldn't even make sense to start there. I would teach them to point, or I would teach them to sign, or a peck, or I want, or I would not start with trying to teach eye contact.
And here's my question, isn't giving a peck, eye contact is a prerequisite. So a peck, if someone's listening, they don't know what it is, a peck is a picture to request. So like, for example, like, not that I would want a cactus, but I can give Monica this as a symbol of I want the cactus, right? How do I do that without looking at you? If I'm like, here, Monica.
You can absolutely do that without looking at someone. You can look at their hand. You can look at their chest. You don't have to look anywhere near their eyes to use pecks.
It's an interesting perspective. Yeah. I mean, it's hard though, because pecks is a harder skill. I mean, from developmental perspective, if a child is looking at pecks, they have to be able to discriminate. whereas a child doesn't have
Yeah.
to discriminate by looking at one object. So it's an
Right.
interesting perspective.
So it's a one thing fits all. I understand that, but it's so abstract because there's no way for you to physically move their eyes that's not super violating and controlling, and you also can't put them inside of your head so they see, like, you can't model it either.
So the way you would model it, the way I was talking about model is, like, let's say we're blowing bubbles and you have the bubbles. I would have the bubble wand like here, and then you want the bubbles, so you're looking at the bubbles, and then I would just bring the bubbles to my face and blow them to show you you can look at my eyes to ask for it. And as soon as you look at me, I would blow the bubble. So that's how you would prompt that behavior. Is just
I wouldn't learn that from that.
Okay. It's interesting.
So basically I stand at, I think that an appropriate situation in which to teach eye contact is when you are teaching an older child that you can explain why it's valuable in a social situation and in what ways it can be valuable for showing signs of engagement. But I wouldn't teach it to a child just so it's a skill they have without knowing why. Like, I wouldn't teach it to a child that I can't explain why it can be valuable. Like, if you could have, a 6-year-old would probably be the youngest that I would go into, like, explaining why eye contact can be important to some people. But it would be if their personal goals are based around social engagement, then I would talk about some of the value of eye contact. And if they are comfortable with it, then we could practice it. But not as an early communication form. That just doesn't really make sense to me.
Okay. Well, I mean, we have different perspectives, and so you would be, but we often do different opinions. And like I said, I genuinely do have these conversations because I really do want to learn from people. And so with that said, if you are watching this in record mode and you have an opinion on this, I would love to hear your opinion in the comments. Like, I will take this seriously. Now, when I make these videos, there's not this arrogance of I'm right and everyone else is wrong. I mean, and really this is a split. People seem to be split on this. So I think I would love to have this conversation. So engage in this conversation in the YouTube chat. If you have autism and you think that, or you think that eye contact is painful, let us know. If you had someone who taught it to you really well, let us know how. If you thought someone taught it to you in a way that you didn't like and wasn't respectful, put that in the comments. If you're a parent and you're watching this video, put in the comments. If you're teaching your child to make eye contact, put in the comments as to why you made the decision, and therapists as well. I would love to hear your perspective. I think this is an important conversation to have because like I said, it seems to be split in the community right now as to whether or not we should be teaching eye contact. I appreciate and respect everyone's opinion. I still am leaning towards the fact that, like, as an early communication skill, it's an important skill to have. I find it to be a prerequisite to imitation, or at least orienting towards the speaker. I could maybe agree with orienting towards the person communicating with you. Like if I could kind of say, okay, you know what, maybe you don't have to really look at someone's face. But for example, I don't know how I could possibly teach language to someone who's nonverbal if they can't look at my mouth. I don't care if they're looking me directly in the eyes, but if they're not looking at my face, it's going to be very challenging for me to model language.
I get them to touch my mouth.
Okay, well, we're not doing that right now in like this 2020 world.
Right, but I'm just saying eye contact's not required for that either. If they can't make eye contact, that doesn't mean you can't teach vowel sounds or whatever you're teaching. I've had kids that are like close to blind. Well, they're still gonna learn speech skills even though they can't see my mouth. So I'll put a hand on my cheek or a hand on my neck. So like K sounds you can feel in your throat. So I've done all sorts of things that are more touch oriented than visually oriented.
Yeah, now see, that's an interesting perspective. Now in New Jersey, we're not permitted to touch children, to prompt them, unless you are specialized in prompt therapy and you have special licenses. You actually physically can't touch their faces and prompt them.
Oh no, I'm not touching their face. I'm
having them touch.
I'm having them touch my face.
That's true. Well, and I think that was like so 2019. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's a great perspective. I actually never thought of that, and I really do like that. So I appreciate you for sharing that, because one of the hard things we're all going through right now is as we transition from teletherapy, which I think worked really well, to in-person services, and we're wearing masks. It's very hard when we can't show any social interactions with the children. But that's a very interesting way to do that. I mean, obviously we can't people touching the masks, but I will seriously consider, and I would love to chat more with you about other ways in which you think we can help with communication that way. So very good. I think this has been a very interesting conversation. I appreciate everyone's perspective of it. I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight and appreciate you. If you want to join this live, if you're watching this video on the record mode, head over to my website, hopeeducationservices.com. Under events, you can register for the episode of Ask an Autistic. As a parent, you can come on. As a professional, you can come on. Maybe like me, you're a professional, you want to learn from autistic adults and be a better professional. You can go and get your questions answered. So go on to that. It's every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time.